and who's thank you for joining us on Zoom, and those who are present. This is a pretty good turnout. Thank you. We'll go around and introduce, ask the people who are on Zoom to introduce themselves as well. And I want to just ask from the outset, you can have us recording this for be able to share it with some of the possibly who aren't here. I'm Jay Kahn. I'm Senator Keene and represent 23 towns in Cheshire County. And if I could turn to my left.
Yeah, I'm Randy Phillips here, the acting director of the Water Division at DES.
I'm Shane Chickey. I'm currently the acting administrator of the New Hampshire Geological Survey at the Department of Environmental Services.
I'm Ruth Ward. I am the senator for District 8, and I have 2 other Cheshire towns, plus a whole mess in Sullivan County. And we have had some problems in Sullivan County, and that's why I'm here.
I'm Representative Judy Aaron at Sullivan County District 7, which is Ackworth, Goshen, and Washington.
Yes.
Good afternoon, I'm Amy Bassett, the District Director for the Small Business Administration.
I'm Chris Coates, I'm the County Administrator for Cheshire County.
I'm Lucius Barshall. I'm the state rep for District 10, Marlborough, and Troy.
I'm Pam Russell Slack. I'm from Senator Shaheen's office, and I work here in the Keene office and cover pretty much Cheshire County.
Good afternoon. My name is David Rodriguez. I'm the Director of Operations for New Hampshire DOT.
John Allfels, District 4 Engineer, New Hampshire DOT.
Cool.
Oh, yeah, William Pearson, Finance Assistant, Cheshire County.
Derek Ferland, County Manager for Sullivan County.
Elizabeth Dragon, City Manager for
Corp Blomquist, Public Works Director, Emergency Management Director, Keene.
Lisa Murphy, Southwest Region Planning Commission. I work on hazard mitigation plans and emergency operation plans.
Hi everyone, Henry Underwood. I'm a planner at Southwest Region Planning Commission, and I work with Lisa.
Rod Bouchard is Assistant County.
Do we miss anybody?
Tom J. Cole.
Okay, and those of us who are joining us over Zoom.
Lucy Weber, Cheshire 01.
Mr. Kenny.
Paul Birch. Paul Birch, also Cheshire 01. And the audio is a little difficult from Delegation Hall.
John Bourdonnais, Keene, District 5.
Stephen Smith, Sullivan 11.
Cindy?
Cindy Warmington, Executive Council, District 2.
Sue?
Sue Prentice, State Senator, District 5. And so I have Charlestown and Claremont in my district. Thank you.
And Peter?
Peter Clark from Senator Shaheen's office.
Brown?
Dick Brown with Congressman Custer's office.
Let's see, Dick Ames and Carrie Holmes. Then I think it's Meadow.
Yeah, Councilor Kenny up there on the right.
Yeah, do we introduce Councilor Kenny?
Hi, everyone. It's Councilor Kenny, District 1, representing Claremont, Newport, Sunapee, Plainfield, Cornish. Good to be here with some problem solvers today.
Well, I think hopefully we covered 16 people there. All right, so here are some of our objectives. I'm sorry I don't see Homeland Security here at this point. However, I don't know. Someone's coming down the hall. Jen Harper has been pretty good to outreach to. I thought we had confirmation she'd be here today with 2 other people. Anyway, Jen has been tracking 2 storms from July that are potential for disaster declaration. For Cheshire County, we need to reach a threshold of $2,040,000 of claims. We apparently had north of that, like $3 million worth of claims. The audit process for July 18th and 19th is underway. What I just said about the claims were relative to January 18th and 19th. The July 29th event, which had greater effects on Sullivan and northern Cheshire, that assessment is still, I have not heard a total dollar amount and what the threshold needs to be to qualify for both counties. And here she is anyway. So we'll let her. The way that I had envisioned the flow of this is to welcome. I'm setting this up for you. If you want to join us up here, Jen, just introduce.
Sorry, we got a little lost.
Yeah, no, sorry.
In the building.
Oh, okay, all right. So welcome to Jen, and why don't the other 2, if you'd introduce yourselves, and we've got people on our Zoom too.
Hi everybody, I'm Jen Harper. I'm the Director for New Hampshire Homeland Security and Emergency Management.
I'm Brent Nichols. I'm the Assistant Director.
Fallon Reed, I'm the Chief of Preparedness, Mitigation, and Recovery.
Hi, Fallon. We got to be so familiar with you over one crisis, and now we're seeing you again. So I wanted to, we're going to briefly get an update, Jen, on where we stand relative to the disaster declaration.
Sure.
Then, Amy, if we can, talk about what the disaster declaration might mean for small businesses and small business administration loans and financial assistance. Jonathan, are you the agriculture link for us?
Hey, good morning. Yes, I'm acting as district conservationist in Cheshire and Sullivan counties for the USDA NRCS. Wendy Ward is typically the district conservationist and should serve as the main point of contact, acting for her this week.
So Jonathan, if you hear anything about agricultural land and any kind of programs that folks might qualify for if they have faced disaster or lost business losses, feel free to. And Amy is talking about small business administration. And
what I also heard was New Hampshire Farm Bureau and Rob Johnson,
yes,
who is the legislative liaison there, has also been reaching out to the agricultural community and trying to see, and put them in contact with who they need to be in contact with for any kind of claim of damages. Just so
great.
You know.
Yeah, no, good. We'll take note of Rob. I thought of, he's not in attendance, so, but he's an important link, I understand that, yeah. I did talk to Commissioner Jasper today, just to link him in. All right, so we'll cover our short-term needs with a couple of people, and then hopefully spend a good amount of our time talking about going forward and a longer-term strategy. We have what Commissioner Scott said the other day, a rare opportunity to address some long-term and recurring needs that exist in Cheshire and Sullivan counties relative to stormwater mitigation. And when we look at the Infrastructure Act, as well as the ARPA money, we can see that it talks about climate change mitigation and resilience and the kind that the $110 billion that's in the Infrastructure Act for roads should meet those qualifications, that it addresses climate change mitigation strategies as well as resilience. So how do we position ourselves? We know that we've got a couple of executive counselors. It's great because there is a 10-year highway plan, but those dollars are dwarfed by the amount of money that is available through ARPA and through the infrastructure monies coming to the state. And then there are town dollars. And towns are not represented here today. But we can all reach out to our towns. And the reason the county administrators could play a very important role here is how we communicate out to towns. I'm concerned as I start to talk with towns that what kind of guidance can we offer if there's going to be some matching money from the state? And that's my goal, I think, out of this, is can we establish some type of matching fund for long-term mitigation that would address the stormwater conditions that are faced in Cheshire and Sullivan counties? We could clearly try to introduce a bill and all get behind Representative Aaron's trying to seek some relief for the towns that were recently affected by Cold River flooding in her district. But it seems that we could have a much greater impact if we addressed these issues which are recurring in Cheshire and Sullivan counties. And that's why I'm really grateful that we've got the Department of Transportation with us, who I've said I marvel at how you mobilized after these storms to try to restore safety for the communities that were affected. And I really appreciate Environmental Services being here because dams and culverts and other waterway controls are in their bailiwick. And so between Southwestern Regional Planning and the data that is retained by Environmental Services and the Department of Transportation, we might be able to identify the recurring needs in Cheshire and Sullivan counties. So that's the track that if we can arrive at that place and understand that at the end of today, or by 2 o'clock, then we can begin to form our caucuses, legislative caucuses, that this is the big picture that we see for Cheshire and Sullivan counties, a Western New Hampshire strategy for stormwater mitigation, and try to be unified in multiple chambers, and then to communicate to our towns that, hey, you've got a long list of deferred maintenance issues, but maybe holding some of those dollars to match a 50-50 like state local matching fund might be I don't know where we're going. But I just, you know, those dollars could disappear real fast unless there was some guidance, and that's where maybe the county administrators might be helpful in standardizing some approach for your towns. Judy?
So one of the things that jumps out immediately is that Ackworth. Now, Ackworth got hit very, very badly in this. We lost an entire stretch of road in Cranebrook. And the reasons for that, that's a whole different other thing. But what jumps out at me is that the enormity and the cost of the damage is not something that can be absorbed easily by any town, any of these small towns at least. So when you're talking for a town that is steadily putting money into the infrastructure, Cranebrook Road, for instance, we repaved that and put in 3 years ago at the cost of $1 million. Took us many, many long years to save that money to do this project. And then in a blink of an eye, overnight, you get a storm that wipes out the entire stretch of road, which, I mean, entire roadbed, everything has to be replaced. That can easily run into $4 million based on some of the conversations I've had with, that's not a price tag that a town like Ackworth can absorb. And so we look to the state for some help. Obviously, there's a claim to FEMA and, you know, hopefully, but in the meantime, we've a gap when we wait for that. On that stretch of property, on that stretch of road, we've got one maple producer who's one of the largest maple producers in the state, Bascom Farms, that cannot have access to tap lines to fix them. So he stands to lose if we can't get this stretch of road passable by fall, by the winter. He stands to lose $800,000 in product. That's a problem.
Sure.
And so my big thing that I'm looking for is some way in which we can get gap funding to help us between now and the time we get any kind of FEMA money to at least help get roads passable. We had 9 roads in Ackworth passable, 7 of which were paved.
So we've got talent in the room to address this, and thanks for outlining.
So it's the gap funding that I'm interested in having towns have access to.
So we'll all make note. Gap funding is something we'll try to, before we reach 2, try to come back and see where some of those strategies are. Rod?
We have a comment from Councilor Kenny. I believe we need to make sure all communities have applied for ARPA first. Deadline is August 18th.
Yeah.
And Representative Weber, now that Jen is here, could we please get the very latest on the disaster declaration timeline?
Yep. Good. That's a notice for all towns. The 18th is Wednesday. But thank you for councilors for having notified us of those dates. I know the towns in my district I notified, and they're up to speed.
As of, in Cheshire County, as of Friday, Sullivan, that we're aware of, that hadn't applied. We thought Range hadn't for a period of time, but they have. But Sullivan, anybody knows anybody? We reached out in multiple ways.
We got Sullivan. So, Jen, I think people would like some update. So if you could briefly give us some insight.
Yep. So for the July 17 through 19 flooding event, sent a letter off to FEMA Region 1 in Boston, and the FEMA team has been on the ground with us for 2 weeks. We finished Friday out in the Cheshire County communities that were impacted from the storm. Data, photos, etc. They now have that information To validate, we need to come back out to a handful of towns this week. Documentation that they are asking for. Minimal things, payroll records, invoices, that kind of thing, that shouldn't be difficult to capture at this point, since it's been a month tomorrow. So we hope to have, FEMA hopes to have that information by this, the end of the week. They can continue their validation. Once we get that, chime in if I miss something. Our staff have already started writing the impact statement that's required to go with the letter to the president. So it's an impact statement plus the information from FEMA. We have to meet that $2 million mark, $2,040,529 to be exact. And we're hoping that that can, go off to the president end of the month, beginning of next month. There's a lot of things that go on behind the scenes that I know it's sometimes frustrating and sometimes why can't you make it go faster? We really are relying on the communities to provide the information to us so that we can paint that picture for FEMA, paint that picture for the president to be able to justify, come up with the expenses, the pictures, the documentation about why New Hampshire needs this presidential disaster declaration for the July 17th through 19th storm. Once that letter leaves New Hampshire, we have zero control about how long that takes. Historic 60 days. It depends on what's going on in the country. It depends on what's going on wherever, until we hear back. So once we hear back, we will start the process to get communities signed up. So just need to do a request for public assistance. See, I live in a world of acronyms. Request for public assistance just means, yes, we want to start the process to work with FEMA and to write up our projects about what our disaster damages were. That will take months, many months. And we will, my staff will work with the communities, state agencies, and FEMA to make that process work.
Will municipalities and towns be covered in that process?
Yes, the request for public assistance is for the community and the state. So we have communities that will apply and we have state agencies that will apply. So DOT, DNCR.
So
we also have private nonprofits that provide an essential or critical service. So in past disasters, New Hampshire Electric Co-op has been an eligible applicant. So there are private nonprofits, if they provide an essential or critical service, are also eligible. I think Keene State College will be eligible for damages if they incurred things like that. So.
And so relative to a town like Ackworth.
Yeah. So that's the next storm.
Yes, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
But take an example. Like I mean, take Winchester or Marlborough.
Yeah.
Their loss or replacement would be covered in that with funding from the disaster recovery.
Yeah, so once the request for proposal, request for public assistance has been made, it starts a application process. We'll work with the community to write up the project. Main Street in Keene, I don't know, Winchester Street, whichever street, Roxbury Street in Keene had damages. This is the length, the width, what we filled it with, what we fixed it with. The work that, just say Keene right now, has done, and it's a work 100% done. That is the easy project to write. I say easy, relatively speaking. Court knows what I'm talking about. To write that up. Work that will take longer to repair is just a longer process. If you're talking about replacing culverts, replacing bridges, much longer. maybe they need to hire an engineer to do some work and work with FEMA on what are the eligible project, what's the scope of the project, how FEMA, you know, deems specific things eligible or not eligible. So just because Keene has Main Street that was, you know, flooded out doesn't mean that it may all be eligible under the FEMA guidelines.
There's a pyramid of eligibility. So you start with the applicant, and they're one of three. There's 4 eligible applicant types when it comes to public assistance. New Hampshire doesn't have federally recognized tribes, so there's 3 for us: local government, state government, and then the private nonprofits. Then you look at, you know, is it an eligible county? So the way that public assistance works is a state threshold, but then once you meet that state threshold, we then have to look at the different counties. So we presume Cheshire will meet that, no problem. Was the damage caused within that particular storm? And then they look at the type of damage, and it has to be within one of 7 categories of work. So there's lots of different levels and things like that. So while we hope that all of the work is eligible or the damages, it goes through that process. And then with public assistance, it's only covered at 75%. So the community, or if there's another funding availability, but we can't match federal money with federal money, so it would have to be something different. But it's a 75% match. We also have the opportunity to look at, this is like PA, Super Reader's Digest version of public assistance, but the damages, we can also look at mitigation efforts, so it's not just a straight replacement. If there was a culvert that was undersized or anything like that, there's 3 different ways that folks can be eligible for mitigation through the public assistance program. We'll go through all of those kind of things, but as the director said, there's kind of 2 tracks when it comes to public assistance. Something that's work that's completed, whereas already been repaired completely. That's kind of our fast track process. We just look at costs and things. FEMA says, yep, this is good, and then they process it rather quickly and they get the 75% check. If, for example, in Ackworth, there's still a lot of work to be completed, that's the more detailed. Another added level of it is the cost of the project. So if it's under a certain threshold, it's considered a small project, which it's something like 132,000. I don't have the exact number, but that's considered a small project in FEMA's eyes, where they tend to fast track that because in some mathematical equation they figured out that it's cheaper to just fast track it than to go fine tooth. And if they get it, that's what the cost of your project is, whether you're over, under, what have you, that's what it is. Large projects, everything gets reimbursed and reconciled down to the penny. So anything over that. So Ackworth down to the penny. So there's lots of pieces and parts to all of that. Also, we have the opportunity that will come with the Hazard Mitigation Grant Program, which is additional monies that will come with this, but again, a 75-25 match. Historically, for public assistance, up until 2011, the state covered 12.5% of the 25% match. That went away in 2011, so now the applicant is responsible for the entire 25% match. So that's the Reader's Digest version of assistance, but kind of where we're at. And then just to note, there are 3 separate storms that we're looking at that have impacted Cheshire and Sullivan counties. Ackworth is part of the second storm primarily, and you know, we have to separate. Unfortunately, FEMA won't let us combine. We're going to try to fight for the July 29th, 30th, and then August 1 and 2 to be combined together over that course, but that's still very questionable. So trying to separate everything, and then if something got re-damaged, like if Keene had additional damages from the second storm, that has to be accounted for separately than the first storm.
So we'll go through this Cheshire County right now, July 17 through 19. This week, while we're doing the Cheshire County, staff are also working on calling communities and asking about damages, invoices, expenses, how much was damaged, so that we can meet that 2 million threshold to get a FEMA team to come back out, hopefully, next week, and start that process with Sullivan County And some towns in Cheshire County that we know.
And then Hillsborough, Merrimack, Belknap, and communities in Hillsborough as well.
Right.
For the town, you said that there's some, in the mitigation dollars,
Yeah.
in the public assistance,
Yep.
the request for public assistance, who would be the coach in your office for towns that don't have a level of completion, a level of both familiarity and having completed the work?
So every community has a field representative from our office. There's a team of 8 or 9 folks. They're split up by county. I also have a public assistance team that would work. So they'll have a couple, basically a mini support team in our office that will help facilitate and go through all of this. We also work very closely with FEMA Region 1 through all steps process. DES, DES does all the permitting. Shane's been out a bunch as well as Rainey on different projects. They give kind of their perspective on things. Because that's the biggest thing, is making sure that we're in line with state and federal rules and regulations. Because if someone does work without a permit or not in accordance with the permit, it can make the project ineligible. So we work very closely with the teams at DES and also DOT. Because DOT is also an eligible applicant for non-federal highway roads, so.
So our staff have already been out there in towns and saying, make sure that you document every single thing that you're doing. Make sure that you reach out to DES, get the proper permitting if you're in or rivers or streams or whatever, because we don't want somebody very, innocently, we're trying to fix this road, and then we come in, a couple months later, once we get and somebody's done some work, and it's now deemed ineligible, which is historically in New Hampshire.
Another piece, just to remember, wait for FEMA declaration to do the repair work. That almost hinders communities more if we wait, because you have to deem that it was this work needed to be done. So the sooner you can go and get the repairs, and I understand the money is the problem there, and there may be some options, but if we wait for FEMA to come in, that adds a whole mess more of hurdles.
This question, towns know who their liaison is. They've been submitting, but if there are other points of question, you've been terrific, Jen, in answering calls from all of us. But is there a point of contact for a particular storm?
Just call me.
Call you.
Just call me.
Keep
It's
calling
fine.
Jen.
Yep.
And
it's fine.
you'll route us to the
You bet.
person
You
in
bet.
your office that's
Yep.
most direct.
Yep.
Okay. Fair enough. Lucius?
I'm seeing if I can get a handle on what we're talking about for work that's done outside of the permitting. In 2018, there was legislation passed to release money. There's gap funding pending FEMA approval.
Right, so that's the
Disaster,
exceptional disaster relief loan.
Yes.
Yep.
So right before COVID, we had worked to do this, and essentially the short version of this program is once we get the FEMA declaration, towns can apply for a loan from the state for the amount of money, disaster assessment, and we would loan it to the communities to do the work, but there are several caveats that if it ends up not being eligible or anything like that, the community would be on the hook to pay it back. Once it gets, if everything works, is it comes to our office, and we pay that disaster relief loan. Say the community got $2 million loan from the state, we would hold back that money, pay the treasury, but again, it's 75%. There's a couple hurdles, but that is a much quicker way. We have not instituted it yet because it came actually out of, I think, the last storm.
July
the last
2019 flooding in Grafton County.
Yep. So that is another option we can certainly talk about today if we want, but there's an application process. And basically the community takes on the liability that if for something, if wasn't deemed eligible or it didn't go through, the community would be on the hook for paying that back to the state treasury.
So that's RSA:37-C.
Right.
And again, it's section 2 says when the President of the United States declares an area a federal disaster area and a municipality has applied for federal emergency assistance from FEMA, the governor, with the approval of the council, may approve a loan in the amount of up to the anticipated assistance from FEMA from funds not otherwise appropriated. And then there's a whole other bunch of things that you have to do.
Yep.
So that's all good. I mean, that's sort of like, that's a loan until the FEMA money shows up?
Yes.
Right, so say come mid-October, we get the disaster declaration, and then the community submits their RPA, which is just a one-pager, you know, yes, put us on the list. Then we would work with the community on this loan amount, using what the cost we would from the disaster assessment that we're going through right now. So if Ackworth, for example, has $5 million in damages from their preliminary damage assessment, we could work on that loan up to a certain amount. And then we'd go through the process with FEMA still, but at least the community would have that money. And then, you know, if everything goes through and gets approved by FEMA, then we would just money to pay the treasury rather than it going to the community. But if for some reason something wasn't eligible, the community would have to pay back that loan.
Is there any question of being in the treasury to
I
provide
talked
for
to
this?
Monica on Friday, and she's pretty sure that the money is not going to be a problem.
Good.
Yep.
Rod?
We have a posting by Councilor Kenny in chat. He said, I believe the exceptional disaster relief loan law needs to be readdressed to expedite the funding prior to the presidential declaration. For instance, if the loan coming from the state treasury, perhaps the state could issue its own declaration to activate money.
Yeah.
The law would have to be rewritten to do that. If allowed, it would expedite infrastructure projects prior to winter.
Absolutely.
Okay, well, understood. I think we see the potential conflict that there could be for that, but understood.
Is the exceptional disaster relief loan only for municipalities? Like a private business?
Correct.
That is going through something?
Yeah, it wouldn't be eligible for private business as with public assistance, so that's where SBA would come into play.
Can we use that as a pivot point?
Yes.
All right. Amy?
Sure. And the SBA's disaster assistance.
Feel free to stand if it's going to be
that's
easier.
okay. Hopefully I can.
All right.
Is a centralized.
You need to really use your outside voice because the mics are way over here.
Okay. So the SBA's disaster assistance program is a centralized out of DC program. So I can hit the high levels. I will say our staff has become extremely well versed in it due to the COVID EIDL, which we've been administering since the beginning of the pandemic. So this program does dovetail with that. So again, everything is going to hinge off of that presidential declaration, but once that happens from FEMA, SBA quickly then will put together the procedure and start publicizing that the SBA assistance, and this is private assistance, to small businesses, homeowners, and renters is the space that these programs cover. So if it's a business that has impacted, they can apply directly for uninsured physical damage reimbursement. There is a mitigation piece to it as well. In total, the maximum amount for a business to get through SBA's disaster program is $2 million. If they happen to also have a COVID EIDL, that does factor into that maximum amount, so they can't exceed with the two loans combined. SBA does cover homeowners and renters as well. Those are direct disaster loans to those groups as well. And for homeowners, again, it's the uninsured damages, and that maximum loan size is $200,000. And then renters and other people can get personal property loans, as well separately, and that's up to $40,000. It's a fixed interest rate loan, unknown exactly what it would be, but the COVID idle right now is 3.75. Federal government, typically the term is 30 years, and that comes with an upfront deferment period so that they don't have to start making the payments right away. So that's the loan programs in a nutshell. Once we get that press release and that declaration information at our office out of Concord, we start heavily publicizing to get the information out, and we're always happy to be that conduit of sharing information and directing people. The application process is completely online now, so there isn't any, typically they don't come out and staff a center like they used to in the old days, where they would actually staff and be on site, but sometimes that does happen too, to help answer questions as well. So that's that, our programs in a nutshell.
Would the ask questions session be something run by your office?
Typically, it's staff from the SBA's disaster assistance team. They have specific specialists that come out into the field to do that, but we help support that to the greatest extent we can. They are the experts in these programs, for sure.
And make that request through you?
We can absolutely help facilitate that.
Other questions about disaster relief?
And if I just wanted to add on, I know we have USDA on.
Yeah.
We do have gaps in our program for all the ag type of space, because we don't want SBA and USDA overlapping. So we don't cover those programs, those types of businesses and the ag related ones. So that would be something would have to work parallel to us to help those businesses.
And I wanted to ask you that the deferred payments, if there is a disaster declared, how long can that payment be deferred?
So it's an automatic 6 month is what it was. We've now seen it with COVID, they've gone up to 24 months. So it starts when the loan is actually dispersed to the person or to the business, is when that payment deferment starts. And again, it probably would be closer to 12 months, I would guess, at this point. The program has changed so much with the COVID that it's a little unknown what a regular disaster will look like as far as that goes.
Yep.
So, with a loan, though, that in anticipation of the business getting money from FEMA?
No, this is, when FEMA makes that declaration,
Right.
it's always SBA that's coming in to make the actual loans. This is federal funds directly through SBA, so the businesses and the people end up with a direct SBA loan.
So there's no other help other than loans then from SBA?
Not through us. Sometimes FEMA has grants, but I don't know what that looks like. They have sometimes some quick assistance type grants if people need immediate home housing or things like that.
And that's more for individuals, and unfortunately with this disaster, we haven't met the threshold for individual assistance.
Right.
So at this point, the only thing for businesses would be the SBA loan.
Okay.
Which is a loan.
Okay.
Rod?
Under that, from the USDA and NRCS, as opposed to the following. NRCS offers grant funding for watershed-related damage to the Emergency Watershed Protection Program. And there's a link that he's posted that I can distribute later.
Our office also works very with NRCS on the disaster. We've been chatting with, I believe it's Matt from NRCS on all of these, and where FEMA may not cover, NRCS can assist, but we work very closely with them as well.
So,
Yeah.
okay, so for example, we've got Clark Sugar House that his whole property, because of this flooding, because of culverts that didn't, that failed, and water and debris and everything flushed out onto his property, damaged the electrical and everything. So what recourse does he have though, other than a loan to help his small business?
Through SBA for the physical,
Just a loan?
it would be a loan.
Okay.
I don't know
That's a
about
problem.
damage to, like, it's a little bit, but
Okay.
what we have is loans.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Are we good with looking at these two? Okay, I guess I'm going to interrupt that, do what the science teacher did in the back of the class, is interrupt your conversation. But the Department of Transportation, you're kind of like the fulcrum of this. You're trying to balance the immediate relief and document the long-term solutions as well. Maybe just how do you have information as a result of these storms that can be useful for us to document the kinds of measures that we need to take to avoid, try to mitigate future disasters?
Right, so let's start with our role in an event like this. So much like the towns and the businesses, we are an applicant for aid. The damage that your state highway system sustained and the cost to repair that exceeds the budget that we have in our maintenance budget. And as you all know, our capital funds are booked out for the next 10 years in our 10-year plan, and there's enough there for the next 40 or so years when you look at the needs. So we will be an applicant for FEMA aid, and we will also be an applicant for federal highway emergency relief funds for our federal aid eligible roads that were damaged. We will get the same sort of percentage reimbursement for our damage. So in addition to the 75% or so that we'll get from FEMA, we will need to scrape together state funds for that 25% match. So when it comes to the damage, we are an applicant for aid, much like the communities and those others who were hurt from the damage. When a storm like that occurs, our first push is to get out there and restore the state roads for emergency access so that ambulances can get where they need to go, fire trucks can get where they need to go, and goods can get into the residents, and the residents can get out pretty quick. And we're pretty effective at doing that. Where we struggle is we do not have a lot left over to go around to the communities and help out there. Where we become involved in the communities is New Hampshire DOT is the primary for Homeland Security, ESF 1, Transportation, and ESF 3, Public Works. So all the resources that the communities need come in through requests through Homeland Security for resources. We then work with the statewide Public Works Mutual Aid to try to match up resources from the other public works departments, much like fire departments cooperate in a large fire. And then in the immediate aftermath, we will often go a little further than our authority allows, and we will meet those resource requests because we want nobody in the position that we see folks in Ackworth and other communities in, and we want nobody without the ability to safely move emergency services through their communities. At that point, we kind of pull back in our responsibilities and with the communities, and we are pretty well strapped in a lot of ways ourselves. A little bit about how we'll respond to the damage. We're fortunate to have very capable maintenance crews around the state. So what you saw in the immediate aftermath of the storm was crews coming together to restore that emergency access. Some of the smaller areas that were damaged, we will be able to do the final repair. In this particular storm, though, we have at least 2 locations, one on 123A in Alstead and one on Route 12 in Charlestown, that are beyond our capabilities of putting back together the way they need to be put back together. So we've taken folks from our design office, our Bureau of Environment, our geotechnical folks, and we're at this time expediting designs and solutions that we will then put out to bid for large contractors to bid on and come in and do those major repairs with us or for us, with an eye at restoring two-way traffic to the best that we can before winter. So that is where we're at with our response. A little bit about this storm, and I think this is where this conversation is headed, and Rainey and Shane are gonna have a lot to add to this, but a little bit about this particular storm that piques our interest is, the first thing is the record rainfall for the month of July. So we've seen data that Homeland Security has pulled together from National Weather Service that identifies July as a record-breaking event for rain over the month. And 3 to 4 times the average rainfall event for July fell this past July. So that's one factor. And what does that do? That fills a lot of the ponds, fills a lot of the streams, and takes a lot of the fields, the farmlands, the area that can absorb a heavy rainfall and saturates it. So the event, particularly on the late July event, the 27th and 28th, was it? 29th and 30th. That particular event, again, the rainfall volumes we saw in the 4 and 5 inches in a period of about 6 hours. And there, I am sure, are locally higher volumes. That's an extremely high rainfall volume in a short amount of time, 6 hours. So that's approaching what the 100-year storm is in a 24-hour period. So when you look at those rainfall events, they are extreme and very quick. So you have all this water falling in a very short window over land that's saturated, running through streams and ponds that are already filled, and they all run over the landscape through our roadways, trying to get through these culverts that for the most part are designed oftentimes for a 25 or 50-year storm. The culverts are designed to pass a certain amount of water, but what's very difficult to account for is all the debris that this water carries with it as it flows over the land, through the woods and so forth. A roadway right-of-way, in most cases, might extend 20 or so feet from the edge of pavement, and we work hard with limited resources to keep that area clear. But when you go out in the woods, just a little ways away from it, you see a lot of trees down, a lot of slash, a lot of debris there. It's these heavy waters carrying that debris in to block our pipes that are at a stage where there's already much more water coming towards them. So I think where we're headed is talking about resiliency, talking about what we can do to build back better so that we don't find ourselves here again. And that is a real challenge for us, and one we're anxious and very willing to have the discussion and conversation about it. My only point, I can promise you, if it was an easy solution, we would have done it a long, long time ago, but let's go forward.
Yeah, I want to publicly thank you and New Hampshire DOT for the quick response you had in Ackworth particularly, and bringing us or getting us in contact with resources such as Jersey barriers and yellow-orange cones and signage, because that became, we don't have those things in our road garage. And that was number one for public safety. We didn't want people driving off into a cliff, off a cliff somewhere. But also to your point, one of the things that contributed, I believe, to the destruction on Cranebrook Road was a beaver dam broke. And I think we also have to take a look at how we deal with the environment and beaver dams and that kind of thing as well. And, we can talk about the beavers and how, we have to take care of the environment and the beavers. But in reality, there's structures there that they build that are problematic.
And when you say take care of them, how do you?
That's up for discussion.
We don't know what happened.
Do you know somebody that knows somebody?
But also a big concern, I mean, obviously up in Washington, the town of Washington, we had a big issue with worrying about whether these dams and spillways were going to hold back everything that they're supposed to do. And that was a big concern too. And I think we need to pay, as a state, we need to pay more attention to how our dams are maintained and have some state funding perhaps available so that these towns can do the proper maintenance, as well as there are some places in Washington, they have like homeowner associations that have these dams. So they're not municipal dams, but they still need some sort of assistance to maintain them so that they don't fail in these situations.
Don't worry, there's no storm predicted. Yeah, Court.
Thanks. Court Blomus, Public Works Director, Emergency Management Director. One of the things I have to, being at the local level and going through, this is probably my 9th federally disaster recommendation. You need to encourage your towns. 3 people that need to stay together is your EMD, the select board, and your highway public works person.
Yep.
Okay. Historically, that is a problem because typically your EMDs are not your public works types folks, but those are 3 that needs to be gathered. As we start moving, we talk about rebuilding and resiliency. The towns are going to be responsible, which means you need to get them thinking about documenting when the last time these things have happened. Because one of the things, and let my partners, my state and federal partners close their ears for a moment, these are all very good programs, but they require documentation. They require documentation of repetitive loss. So when you start moving into the hazard mitigation program, some of the other ones, they're looking for, when was the last time this occurred? How bad was it the last time? Sometimes towns are not always good at that, but they have people that remember. So that you need to encourage your towns to make sure that they're sitting down and documenting the last time that this certainly be things have occurred. It's also a long haul. I'm looking at myself, and I know every highway guy out there right now is going, what do I need to fix? Because I've got winter coming. And it may be a 2-step process, which means you may only do temporary work this year. I've talked to the Ackworth folks. You may only be doing temporary this year, understanding you've got a long haul to come up with the final piece. And it's okay. I mean, that's the other aspect. Sometimes we want to get everything fixed right now, but it's going to be okay that you may end up having to take 2 steps and you may end up having to fund 2 steps. So that's my, again, recommendation as we start talking about, Renee will talk about it. And I can also emphasize the permitting side. I know we all kind of chase at, why do I need to go get a wetlands permit? But they have an emergency permitting process. They have their culvert permitting processes. Your folks, you need to remind the local folks they need to do that so you don't get surprised later on when, again, the feds come back and say, oh, you didn't do that? Okay, sorry, it's now all ineligible. I mean, those are my advice.
I get it. But if the road has to be made passable, you can't wait around a week for somebody to get back to you.
Again,
I'm just telling you.
no, trust me, I get it.
No, I know.
I get it,
I know.
that's why I wear this and that's what I'm coming off of. But I also say, be aware, that's why I try to work with my public works, that's what I'm the chair of the director of the mutual aid system here, and we try to educate our folks out there, is that sometimes you have to take that deep breath and you've gotta work with them. I know, again, DES is very, very good under these circumstances, they will get to you. May not be tomorrow, maybe a couple days, but it's better to do that versus take the risk. Because at the end of the day, you take the risk, the towns may not get that money back.
So then do we wait and have a road impassable where people are living?
There are things you can do, but there are things you can do to temporarily make it passable.
Yeah.
You just have to do it the right way.
Yeah.
That's all. I know it's frustrating, trust me. 28 years.
Rod's got a question.
We have 3 comments pending here from Councilor Kenny. I keep hearing that municipalities might be on the hook for payments if they don't meet FEMA requirements with regards to reimbursements for the disaster declaration. Is the State Emergency Management Team or New Hampshire DOT providing technical assistance to the municipalities so they don't get caught in this situation?
Yes. Yes is the short answer, Counselor. So my staff, I think I've said a few minutes ago that my staff are out there working with the towns one-on-one. What are your damages? Let's document it. We need this. Call DES for your permit. Let's work with DOT. If there are some communities that aren't quite sure what to do, let's jump on a conference call. Maybe DOT can provide some technical assistance. Get Court with Public Works Mutual Aid on the phone and do a quick conversation or long conversation. And what are those things that we can offer a community, understanding that they may not have all the resources that available to them? What can Public Works Mutual Aid, what can the state DOT, maybe even DES with emergency permitting? So yes.
If I may, Director, there's also, we do a lot of non-disaster time education. So our liaisons work with the communities on a day-to-day basis about preparing for disasters and making sure you're operating within your own procurement procedures and all of that. So we spend a lot of that time, but also, from the second a disaster occurs, we reinforce that as well. So, and it's really, we provide the information and the guidance, and then it's on the municipalities to, work with that.
Senator, just to follow up on that, just because I'm curious, what we're finding, especially just getting towns on the portal so that they can claim their money, is that they need to be walked through it. And we happen to have a grants manager here. We also have Will Pearson in the back here, who's working on all the ARPA funds for the county, and so we can walk people through that. The problem is in these situations, I just want to hear it again. You'll have people like in Roxbury where they're selecting, but they don't have any town administrator. So they are the guys that are doing this, and that changes every 2 to 4 years, whatever it is. And in these situations, you'll have people that can walk them through this and really educate them so that they can understand, because that's one of the hardest things to get people going. I hear what Court says, but he's got a team behind him on some level to do a lot of this stuff. But I'm talking to smaller towns like Ackworth and others, but that are struggling, that may not have a town administrator, may have an administrator, but that person's more focused on getting the minutes done for the next meeting and the agenda ready for the next meeting, than all of a sudden having to step into what they've had to step in over the last few years, whether it's CARES money, American Rescue Plan funds, or whatever it may be.
So from our office, with our liaisons, and we have done this through COVID and will likely expand this, historically FEMA has assigned a liaison, but the state has taken on the role during COVID, and we'll explore that. But it's a one-on-one relationship. While Cheshire County has been very lucky and hasn't had a federally declared disaster in the last 10 years, in just the last 5 years that I've been in my position, this will be my 8th and 9th federally declared disaster. So we have many small communities in other counties that are in the same situation. So we spend more, like Court, for example, knows PA inside and out just as well as I do, so you let us know if you need help, but he's pretty much got his team and got it under control. We'll do the hands-on one-on-one with the communities that need it to make sure that every step of the way, and that's what our liaisons do in Blue Sky Days, and we'll really do this as well during this disaster, as well as the public assistance team that we've been very fortunate, unfortunately through COVID, to expand, and are asking and actually going to GNC and fiscal this week for 3 more positions to beef up the public assistance team so that we have more staff to assist with this. Because this is such a big disaster, and Cheshire County has been lucky that they haven't had anything in almost 10 years. So we're very aware of that need, and I don't want to speak for the director, but our staff and our agency, that's what we do, and we're committed to make sure that the communities get every penny back that they can.
Thank you.
Fallon, I will point out that your predecessor had at least 3 declared disasters that I can think of in the 10 years prior to that, so. Elisa?
Hi. Yes, I've heard a little bit about some of the outreach and mitigating for these disasters. As I mentioned, I do all of the hazard mitigation plans in this region. It covers all of Cheshire County, 13 towns in Hillsborough County, and then Langdon and Sullivan County. But one of the things that's very difficult and frustrating is that, as Court had mentioned, there's 3 main characters here, and they're not always talking to each other. So there needs to be, maybe we do a region-wide webinar and really reach out to those 3 individuals as well as anyone else interested. But when I work on the hazard mitigation plans, one of the things that I strongly encourage is that the road agent provides me with a list of problem culverts. A lot of times I hear, well, we don't want FEMA's money to do the culverts because they require us to make them gigantic, and there's no savings in cost by using them at that point. But then we get storms like this, even if they don't come around very often, that totally, the culverts aren't able to handle it, and so there's that frustration of, let's get them in the hazard mitigation plan so that you can be eligible for funding. And somebody mentioned the beaver dams. That's another thing. And we all chuckle at every one of the hazard mitigation meetings. We chuckle about what to do about the beavers. But it is a problem. It blew out Route 63, one in going into Hinsdale several years ago, and that it was impassable for a little while. So there are things that I think we can do to try to get people to take these things seriously, and I think now's the time, especially after seeing how much how much rain we can have in a short amount of time, that can really, if we had only done some of these things ahead of time, we might not have had some of the situation that we did.
So I know that all of my towns have some sort of emergency management plan.
Yep.
And I don't know if that's required by the state or whatever, but I mean, I'm sure that some of them were not updated. So do you do any kind of trainings for municipal folks to how to make
So my staff are responsible for working with 234 communities across the state. There is no mandate that you have a local emergency operations plan. We highly recommend it. The only thing that you have to have in the state of New Hampshire is a hazard mitigation plan if you want FEMA dollars. If you don't want any FEMA dollars, you don't have to have a hazard mitigation plan. And there's only a couple of towns right now, maybe, that have said, no, I'm not going to do that. So my staff come out, work with the community. We update local emergency operations plans pretty much on a 5 to 6 year cycle. And hazard mitigation plans are the same.
Yeah.
And so it's done as a team, the whole community, everybody sits around the table, go through it. Same thing with the hazard mitigation plan. It's a team sport, as we say.
And our
This-
office facilitates federal funding for those to occur.
Right. So we do fund those.
And does FEMA have any requirement?
For local hazard mitigation plans, yes. There's a
But
very-
a requirement for a plan, but if it's, what's the age?
5 years.
For a hazard mitigation plan, not for an emergency operations plan.
Right.
Yep.
Yep, the standard for local hazard mitigation plans as well as the state hazard mitigation plan is a 5-year cycle. And if there's any major updates between them, you know, if there's some new bridge built or something like that, you would do, you know, the maintenance and update because that could impact. But that's what the Regional Planning Commission manages for this area almost exclusively and is up to speed on all of that stuff.
So where we took a segue here on Department of Transportation was relative to design. And so on these two major road washouts, can the design and the construction be completed in the window that you're looking for?
Certainly for Route 12 in Charlestown, we need to do everything we absolutely can to have that roadway reconstructed and opened by Thanksgiving. And we are putting a full court press on to meet that date. When it comes to 123A in Alstead, that's complicated by the dam immediately upstream. So we will be working with DES, we will be working with the dam owner. We're very comfortable that this winter it will at least be better than it is right now, where I can't say today that we'll have a permanent fix there by winter, but we should be well on our way to that.
Yeah, Jen?
Thank you. So I think one of the things that would be helpful for me and probably a lot of other people in this room was the fact that we were hit very quickly with a lot of people calling us, asking us a lot of questions, and quite frankly, I didn't even know what I didn't know. And by the time I was able to find out where to even start to go to ask a question, then I was back to trying to call all of these people back to tell them, I haven't forgot about you, but I don't even know what I don't even know, even where to go to get the information yet. So is there, I hate to say the word, I'm looking at flow chart, I'm sorry, but it's the only thing I can think of, is there something almost to like dumb it down for us, like, look, this is what happens, this is where you go, where do we start? I mean, I called poor Chris, I mean, he's on vacation in Maine, to ask him, who do I call? And I just got a lot of, nobody knew. And I don't think that that's really what people wanted to hear. And then I finally was able to, you know, I got a number from you, but that was over a week in. And then I was, like I said, I was stuck back trying to just call people back to say, I'm working on it. Is there something that we can put together that, you know, really just, this is your starting point? You know, do you start with, you know, do you start county level, do you start state level, and who are the contacts for these places?
So I'm sorry, I came in late and I missed who you are, who
I'm
you
Jennifer
represent.
Rhodes. We spoke on the phone for like an hour.
Yes. So the starting point is a community's emergency management director. Their community's emergency management director works directly with my staff. My staff know who to call, where to go. So let's be clear, I don't own anything. Homeland Security and Emergency Management owns nothing. I know who Shane is, I know who Rainey is, I know who Dave Rodriguez, and my staff will reach out to those state agencies or Public Works Mutual Aid and connect an emergency management director with the resources they need at the time of whatever their need is.
Community management what?
Emergency management director.
So every community is required by law to have one. It may be the fire chief, it may be the police chief, it may be whoever is appointed, it could be the board of selectmen. In Court's case, you know, he's the public works director as well, but every community is required by law to have an emergency management director. And that's who we work with on a day-to-day basis. And they facilitate and start that information.
They're the ones that help develop the community's emergency operations plan. So if they need to activate their community emergency operations center, like we activate the state emergency operations center, and then my staff liaison back and forth with those local emergency management directors to get them the resources that they need at the time they need them. So that's the starting point.
Many of the towns on the town webpage will have emergency management as a drop-down, and that'll tell you who the person is, or at least the number to call.
So,
I didn't find I got very much help at all, to be honest with you.
Ah,
It was-
okay.
I mean, I was
Right.
talking to people in Marlboro, I was talking to people in Winchester, I'm talking to people in Troy, and everywhere I turned was just, nobody knew what to do. Even the people that knew what to do, just didn't know what to do. And I certainly didn't know what to do.
well, now we're better informed, and we know that Jen is there, and anyway, yeah.
Yeah, so I have another question for Court, though. Now, you have a list of all the towns that are that are members of mutual aid.
Yes.
Have you reached out to the towns that are not members to let them know that you exist?
Yes.
Okay.
We also use the opportunity during a disaster when a community is looking for assistance and they're not part of the association, that we push that, because it's only $25 a year.
Yeah.
And that can happen very quickly. So if we have a community that's not part of Public Works Mutual Aid, then we push them towards that. And very often they sign right up and.
I think Ulstead is one who, they were a member, they left, and they became a member again, I think 2 days after the first event.
Yeah, because I know one of my towns, I spoke to the select board there, and they totally were not aware that there was even such a thing as mutual aid. So I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. I mean, this is, I think, like anything, educating the elected officials who come and go, your town, again, the highway, the road agent, or the highway, or the public works person. Again, we have, because to join the mutual aid, it's an act of the select board.
Yeah.
And I will tell you, there are select boards out there over the years who have said, no, we don't want to do this. So then you have one of these, and then that's when everybody starts looking at it. But no, we can do communities, counties, water and wastewater groups. By law, we got it changed a few number of years ago. We even allow private wastewater and water companies to be part of our mutual aid.
I also included in their hazard mitigation plans. I encourage them to include it in their hazard mitigation plans.
So I want to make sure we get to the place of, is there some kind of Western New Hampshire approach to this in a long-term sense? And I need to make sure that we give environmental services some time to explain what might go into that, what are some of our starting points, and how do we build?
Yeah, thanks. And for the record, Randy Pelletier with DES. I think one of the issues that represented that we talk about as far as time lags and permitting, in any kind of storm event like we've had, and we've had a lot of anomalies over the last 5 or 6 years, all it is a phone call. Phone call, you get an emergency permit, like Kurt said, and you move along. What happens historically is in many situations, people will do whatever they need to do to get access open. It doesn't mean that the design is even remotely close to prudent or what should be done there. So at the end of the day, you do whatever you can, obviously, emergency vehicles, like you said, so it's a phone call away. That's done. What happens is, in a lot of situations over time, a lot of public works folks that don't have the luxury of having somebody like Kurt on board that has the broader breadth of knowledge is they'll take what's available on their grounds, put it in, let's say if it's a culvert, and it's done and over, and then when it comes back to us after for permitting, it's grossly undersized. So I have seen, and I've been at DES for a long time, longer than I should probably admit, but the issue is people spend, I had a couple of communities that spend $80,000 replacing barrel culverts. They put them in, they needed a road to be able to be passable through the winter. Very next spring, $80,000 gone, washed away, because there wasn't appropriate design and looked at the hydraulic capacity of that particular thing. So I think we strive to do a lot of outreach to public works folks. As Kurt mentioned, there's the public works folks that do have some low-end culvert expertise that they can replace up to 48 inches as they go. But keep in mind, and I think Chris at DOT mentioned it, a lot of what we see throughout the state were culverts designed for hydraulic capacity for a 25-year event. Over the last 5 years, we've seen basically some 500-year events, you know, and there's culverts that just can't handle it. Even DOT will tell you that a lot of their major culverts were designed on a 50-year event. Well, it's not uncommon to have a 100-year event now. And what's been very unique over the last several years is the major storm events, as probably Jen could attest to, have been very geographically located. You'll get some communities that get 4 or 5 inches, and 3 towns over they get 5 drops. It's been really strange, it's been really difficult to plan. But I think one of the things that I would advocate, and we have been advocating for years, is that you got to look much further beyond the tip of your nose when you look at your overall municipal infrastructure. And that's not only culverts, it's water, it's wastewater, and those types of costs associated. You hit the nail right on the head when a lot of these communities don't have the fiscal wherewithal to be able to handle those things. I'm hoping that with the American Rescue Plan money, New Hampshire, as you know, I'm sure, is getting somewhere around $1 billion. Now, some of that money will be allocated to DES for water and wastewater. And when you think about that, to apply in culverts and stormwater, but the hitch on the first ARPA plan is that it's got to be SRF, state revolving loan qualified. So I think as time goes on, we'll be able to do some tweaks, because to be candid, the directions coming out of U.S. Treasury on availability and eligibility couldn't be any foggier.
150 pages of it.
I mean, it's just, you know, go ahead.
But to your point, and I agree with what you're saying, I think what we're lacking as a state is an emergency response team from DES, emergency response team from New Hampshire DOT, emergency response team from any of these agencies, so that when an emergency happens, that you come out and you see what's going on, and you can help direct where the emergency fixes can be done, so that we can get up and running as soon as possible, especially to be able to get police, fire, ambulance, and that kind of thing. I would have loved to have somebody from DES come out and say, no, you can't put this road back together like this for now, because, I mean, you say it's just a phone call, but I mean, the emergency, we had emergency responses. We had to put an entire section of road that was washed away, that you now have, 10 foot of no road there, that you had to make that road passable. You throw the culvert that was there before in there, you cover it up, and you're good to go until you make the real fix that you're supposed to make.
Well, you raised a good point, and I think with Jen's folks, whenever we have any kind of emergency, whether it be storm, water, wastewater, we all get together. DES has a team that goes over to Homeland Security and manages the phones, as well as we have DES staff that are on call for emergency permits. Now, that's in the case you're just describing. If I went out, being an engineer, went out to the site, I mean, I'd have to do a hydraulic analysis to tell you, no, you need a 10-foot culvert there, not an 8-foot. So the point is that we believe that you have to do whatever you can in the short term to get access and availability. And to be candid, you can't just go out, like if you were to call Kurt and go out and say, what size culvert do I need there? He's got to do some analytical looks to see what, in fact, you want to spend that revenue on for the finished product. So the approach that's happened for you in this last storm would be probably the only appropriate short-term approach approach. Where we get in cost issues is, once the event's over, you've got access back. Is that a long-term solution? Many times it isn't. And I don't say this to be critical, but a lot of public works folks will take what they have on site just to make the road passable, which is the right thing to do. But it doesn't mean it's the long-term right thing to do. So that's where we have difficulties in the past. But
Well, I think in my town, we had certain, we had the understanding that we just have to get this road passable.
Yeah.
And that's okay.
And we'll go back and we're gonna take that out and fix it and do it the right way when we get, the time and the money to do that.
And I think that's okay. Oh, I'm sorry.
Well, that's exactly how the public assistance program works. What we do in disaster response is bring representatives from all the state agencies and federal agencies into the EOC to help this. Telling a community what culvert or what repairs to do is beyond the scope of what DES and DOT can do, but that's where communities have engineers. Their hazard mitigation plans list all of these things that need to be done. We have funding regularly for hazard mitigation improvements that we don't see many applications for. We're getting almost $11 million from COVID in hazard mitigation that will be out there, but so, anything that's damaged as a storm should be done through public assistance mitigation, because there's not a cap on that like there is other programs. If it's something that's not damaged, that's listed in your hazard mitigation plan, that can be done through 404 mitigation. So we have all of these programs and plans, and many people are very versed in it, but I do think we need to work on our education program, which the director has tried to do and done to do, but to be honest, the last 24 months we've been in COVID, and other things. So there are programs out there and are things, we just need to get folks to know, but we do have money coming in. The piece, and I think to what Senator Kahn was saying earlier, is that 25% match. That's where it struggles. If you have $26 million of damage in act work, and I can get you 75% of that, that's still a big chunk of change that you're on the hook for 25%. That's where I would recommend that we look to get some sort of fund or whatever happens, because that's where people struggle, is the match on that.
Absolutely.
So I want to
couldn't
pursue
agree
that. Do you want to follow up?
I was just gonna say, I mean, and Paul is right. We, again, all of us out there in the public works community, we're all available for each other to figure out what's going on. I know Ackworth because I was talking to your town administrator and your road agent. I was talking to Allsted. I was talking to a number of them. So there really isn't a team to be able to get in. Your local folks know what to do. Sometimes it's just talking through on this initial response. But like I said, the challenge sometimes is back to that communication between that road person, the emergency management director, and the select board. And then that decision, as Randy talks about, is we go in and we do an emergency, get the road back open again, and then everybody's like, well, that's okay, I don't have enough money, so we're just gonna leave it alone until the next time it happens. So that's part of the education that needs to be happening out there. I was here, but again, it used to be the state did 12.5%, but the legislature decided to cut that out. Sorry, I'm being harsh, but y'all did. Well, hey, we all wear what our predecessors did, okay, at the end of the day, all right? So that's part of this ongoing discussion. I was part of the SB 60 back when we did the water infrastructure plan a decade ago under Senator Fuller. And you talk about dams. We identified over $1 billion worth of work that needed to be done out there in the water, wastewater, stormwater, and water area. It's 10 years later, I don't think we made any progress on that particular plan. So I think that's part of this education process, and disasters are a great way to remind us. But I go with Senator Kahn, how do we move from here? Part of it is using Southwest Region to get those hazard mitigation plans done. I will tell you, a lot of towns don't treat those very seriously. But again, there's got to be a checkbox for FEMA. And you need to emphasize to those towns is that stuff is important in between the raindrops. And that sometimes is what happens, is we forget in between the raindrops what's important. So the resources are there. It's just we have to always continue to be working with them.
So historically, just a food fact, I can't say today, but we always talked about mitigation dollars for every $4, or it's a 4-to-1 ratio dollar invested for response. It's actually been increased down to 7-to-1 for many bridges, culverts, things like that, for every dollar in mitigation work, it saves $7 in response. And that's really, I've been in emergency management a long time, as is the director. emergency management is kind of that silent partner until something happens, but we looked through all 3 of these storms. Anything that has had mitigation work through the Hazard Mitigation Grant Program survived these storms and survived them well. So the plans that the Regional Planning Commission works on, that the communities work on, they truly do make an impact, but it's like anything else, right? Trying to have that rainy day fund, or putting into stuff where is the biggest impact, what can you get your folks to vote on, that sort of stuff. But mitigation truly works. We've looked at it, the roads, the bridges, the culverts. There's lots of funding now from the federal side available that's coming into the state, but that's really where we need to move forward.
So
Jay, could you take a couple of comments from people who are remote?
What do we got, Rod?
We have Suzanne Prentice is asking, what is our debris management strategy?
You want that one?
You've got a bunch of questions about debris management strategy, one from Paul Birch and other ones. And my comments can be passed over because we've really kind of covered the necessity of mitigation and forward planning. But I think the debris issues and the ongoing maintenance issues that are in the comments are ones I'd like to see addressed, please.
So
Debris.
We have another comment from, or question from Representative Birch. Problem culverts. The town of Westmoreland has been trying for an inordinate amount of time to get a simple emergency authorization from DES to get a clogged under the bridge cleanup approved. If there is flooding due to sediment, flooding of good farmland will occur. Everyone agrees that the work needs to be done. A similar permit was approved in 2018. Now that the work needs to be done again and better, DES seems to be arguing whether it's an emergency authorization or a maintenance project, and nothing is getting done. And from Councilor Kenny, will there be any legislation like in 2005 House Bill 31 FNA, an act relative to the state matching funds for federal emergency management agency disaster assistance grants, and in making an appropriation therefore? This bill appropriates state matching funds for disaster assistance grants provided by the Federal Emergency Management Agency to address to certain municipalities and other agencies in Cheshire and Sullivan counties. And Representative Birch asks again, can you send a list of Concord participants with job titles and contact information? Councilor Warmington posted, it seems that we don't have a plan for getting immediate funding for these small cities and towns. That's right. So that they can get repairs underway now. What is the likelihood of legislative action that will provide this access to funding? And that's it for most of us.
Okay.
And if I may, I mean, responses to each of those, it would be nice to have the replies.
Well, the legislative, so two things. One, Lucy, you and I and I mean, that's why we're here, right, is to see if we can do that. So
The legislative stuff is a matter of legislative will, and that's a whole nother conversation, although it's a conversation all of us here ought to be having. I'm really more interested in the comments of people from the agencies that are on this call about things like the debris and the mitigation for, which is why I was concerned about having all of those questions asked at one time. I'd like to go back to the beginning and hear about things like Representative Birch's question about ongoing maintenance, and also people who have questions about debris issues stemming from the immediate issue, and see if we can at least get to that part.
anybody want to deal with the debris question?
So I mean, we have a state debris management plan that DOT is the primary author of, but it comes down to into maintenance ultimately, and I'm not as familiar with that plan, but I was just gonna pull it up to see if, pull a couple highlights, but it's all part of our state emergency operations plan and that piece, but also, the community as part of their hazard mitigation plans and things like that should have those areas covered as well. But like anything else, it's having the funding in blue sky days to do this maintenance and do the work and keep things up and, where budgets have been tight and things like that. If, it's like your home. If you don't have the money to have someone come in and clean out your gutters or cut the trees around you, you kind of wait till it's an issue because you have to put food on the table. So it, unfortunately, like many things, comes down to the priorities of funding, and typically maintenance falls off of that when you have larger crises that you have to deal with.
And FEMA offers a course on debris management. There is, if you're going to claim debris management as part of your FEMA response, you're required to follow it per your plan, meaning each local community is supposed to have a local debris management plan. How you're going to deal with vegetation, other materials, on and so forth. And then there's the blurry line between private property and public.
Dave?
I just want to recognize for everybody, when we talk about debris management, there's two general issues. The first issue with debris management is the day-to-day maintenance of keeping our ditches clean, keeping our pipes clean, and that's what I mentioned earlier, where the state and town's responsibility and ability really stops at the right-of-way line. So that's day-to-day maintenance and debris management. When we talk from
With respect, the town can't even get a permit to do the maintenance. That's the problem.
there should be a process to get a permit to do the debris.
Look, let me jump in for a moment, if I can. Can people hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. This is a debris sediment under a culvert that was extensively looked at years ago, and a half job was approved to remove a certain amount of sediment. In the years ensuing, it's piled up again to a higher degree. The planning is done. The road crew is ready to do it. We're not asking for money, and we're stuck in some kind of endless loop of whether this is
Emergency.
or technically something else, and we cannot move forward.
Okay. So noted,
I'll
right?
speak to it. No, I'll
No,
speak to
okay,
it.
all right.
Yeah, I think one of the issues here is the difference of what's an emergency and what's a short-term permit for maintenance. We issue maintenance permits all the time. I would think in 2018, the project you're talking about was handled as an emergency. As you can see, the design wasn't commensurate with what should have been done. I think now they're coming in looking for yet again another emergency permit. We issue emergency permits to solve an immediate problem vis-a-vis public health, safety, transportation routes, those types of things. What you're talking about is a 30-day expedited permit for maintenance that can go ahead in itself. So it sounds to me, and again, I'm not directly involved in the site you're talking about, but my phone number is 271-2951. Certainly give me a call when I get back in the office and I'll track it down. But it sounds to me that the issue here is, does this qualify as an emergency permit, being somebody sends in a plan, they just want to move on in the short term?
If it rains next week and floods next week and floods a whole lot, then we can.
I guess it's the description of what meets an emergency permit, what meets an expedited permit. It sounds to me like what you have is an expedited maintenance permit, not an emergency permit. Everybody in the state could come in, give us a call and want an emergency permit in anticipation of perhaps an event happening in the next week. that would be unruly. We would never be able to handle that load. So if you, what sounds to be prudent application is to look at this to prevent possible issues in the future. But that does not qualify as an emergency.
All right, with a certain amount of embarrassment on my part, what's your name again?
Rainey Pelletier.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
So give me a buzz, 271-2951.
If I can try to turn that into the direction that hopefully we're ending on is Westmoreland is an example of an area that has recurring storm-related issues. The Cold River, we could start at Ackworth or we could end in Walpole. And we know that along that path, there are towns and situations, whether it's on 12A or 123, or that have those kinds of storm-related recurring situations. How do we get the inventory of these recurring situations that emergency management, local agencies, the Department of Transportation, and towns and DES need to address? How do we pull that together as something that could represent a Sullivan, Cheshire County priorities? Because I got to believe this is a fairly significant dollar amount.
Yeah, if I could, I think this would be a good time for Shane. He spends a lot of time, he's works in the geological unit, and he spends a lot of time on river assessment, culvert assessment. And I think he and his staff have been working very hard in an outreach, so I think if we have time, it would be prudent for him to explain what's available as far as educational outreach and participation by us to help communities look long-term and be proactive. I think
Okay.
Shane has a lot to offer.
Shane, can you wrap that up in a few minutes?
I'll sure try. Just for the record again, I'm Shane Schicky, New Hampshire Geological Survey at DES. So we work very closely with basically everyone in this room. We have a close working relationship with DOT and HSCM. We work closely with Southwest Regional Planning Commission. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm just going to sort of just briefly outlay for everyone what it is we've built over the past 10 to 12 years and what tools are available to inform your discussion that will certainly continue on beyond this conversation that we're having today. One of the key things that we've been working on with all these agencies for the past 10 years is we've built a statewide culvert assessment program that's actually an offshoot of a legislative recommendation as a result of the Allstead flood. So, for example, we had interns this past summer who were actually assessing culverts in Allstead and Marlow this summer, working with Southwest Regional Planning Commission. And so we've established a database of culverts across the state, and we take the data that we collect with those. Regional planning commissions also collect that information. And it's in a statewide database to help identify and prioritize culverts that are particularly undersized, that cannot pass the 2, 10, 25, 50, 100-year flow, and also looking at culverts that are particularly undersized that could be sediment and woody material / debris traps. And that data is all available. We have a stream crossing assessment manual that we have for this, put together by the agencies. We have outreach team. We have a whole team that manages that program, and that data is all available live. You can go right on the internet right now and look at all the culvert data prior to this summer, which we're still working on to score. The second thing, which I think is particularly relevant to the conversation that we just had and the question that you were specifically, I can see you looking at it, so feel free. The question that you were just asking is about 5 years ago, former HSCM Director Perry Plummer wanted to establish a statewide flood hazards geodatabase, which is an electronic form, and basically to capture and identify every town's occurrences of flooding, erosion, damage, culvert failures, etc. We went through all the town's hazard mitigation plans, every single one of them in the state, to make the initial population of the geodatabase. Since that time, we have been partnering with the regional planning commissions. As the hazard mitigation plans are updated, they actually take the information from the meetings with town officials and populate that geodatabase. And I've got maps that show you what it looks like in my folder. But after a flood event, we have access to WebEOC. We also have access to the FEMA portal. And it used to be me, but we now have another staff person in our office who takes all that information and populates the flood hazards geodatabase. One of the specific items that we focus on there is issue repeatedly. Of all of the state's flood occurrences, particularly to help you apply for funds that the mitigation funds Fallon was talking about. That is only as good as the data we receive, the data that is put into WebEOC and that we get from FEMA, that we get from the National Weather Service, has to have specific spatial identifying information. And we actually got done a project to provide outreach and guidance to towns to put some additional language in their WebEOC posts, which we understand is hard in a flood event, but to have the identifying information in there so it gets in the flood hazards geodatabase. So from a technical perspective, we've been building the tools and the data that can help move toward a longer-term resiliency plan. Relative to the how to get there, one of the things, and Rainey and I were talking about this on the ride over, many of you are probably familiar with the fact that out on the seacoast, they have a work group out on the seacoast, the coastal work group, the coastal adaptation work group, that specifically works with communities to deal with resiliency issues using data sets specific to coastal flooding. One of the things that we do have in the state is the New Hampshire Silver Jackets. It's an Army Corps of Engineers, federal, state, local interagency work group. And basically, we can do projects every year with the Army Corps of Engineers. We've worked with several communities. We worked with Hinsdale several years ago. And basically, to help them, give them tools and data to help them maximize their chances at mitigation dollars. The Silver Jackets could potentially be used as a broader resiliency work group. There are some members of that work group that I think have an interest in doing that. However, the Silver Jackets has currently to date never been used in that way, but the possibility does exist. For it to be used in that way would require towns to come to us and want that type of assistance, or groups of towns to come to us and want that type of assistance. So in the Reader's Digest version, those are some of the data sets we've been putting together and the options that are available from our shop.
Yeah, Lucius.
Yes. Lots of information there, thank you so much. Your survey, your flood geo survey, do I understand did I hear you say correctly that every culvert in the state has now been surveyed?
No, we've assessed, I have a map, but basically we've assessed, I'd say about 40 to 50% of the locations where we believe culverts to be, based on an intersection of the road network and the stream network. Mm-hmm. So we have pecked away at Southwest New Hampshire. So what happens every year is we have funding for interns that we train using that manual, mm-hmm. and we go out and assess the culverts. We will then reach out to Southwest New Hampshire, in Southwest case, and ask them, do you have any plans to do any assessments on your own this year? In this case, I believe this year you said you didn't. So we then work with you to identify what are some good towns, and then we send our interns to Southwest New Hampshire. We've been pecking away at Southwest New Hampshire in addition to other work, so a lot of our efforts have been grant focused, they've been watershed focused, so largely southeast, south central New Hampshire, up in the Berlin, Androscoggin watershed has been done. Mm-hmm. There's still some remaining gaps. Southwest New Hampshire, there are some gaps. There's a big gap up in Upper Valley, Lake Sunapee region, Regional Planning Commission, and a big gap up in the Upper Connecticut River Valley, but a lot of the other parts of the state have been completed.
I can only imagine that sometimes this work poses a lot of challenges. That's finding what's underneath the ground, basically. In Marlboro, what I'm dealing with, I believe, is a case where the culvert size going across 101 is undersized, and the watershed is having to drain a lot more water than it has in prior years. It's just getting worse every year. And so while the leak in the hole of the roof that the town's been dealing with hasn't been too bad, it only leaks when it rains. But right now, the rain is really getting in there, and we're looking at a situation where, I mean, I'll be very curious to see if you've done survey marble. Because
We
it's
did last year.
Oh, that's great information. I will be contacting you for that by then. Okay, thank you.
You'll leave a card for, yeah.
Jen, there's a question over there.
Yeah, and Chris has something too.
Representative Stephen Smith has an item
Good.
he wants to bring up.
Yeah. Steve?
Representative Smith, can you hear us?
Yep, thank you. So I think one of the things we did a lot of in this meeting too was mix temporary response, getting accessibility to people who are cut off, and the long-term stuff. I wish that there was guidance for the towns and municipalities on how to do that instead of being frozen, waiting for some kind of evaluation to be done. I believe everybody has done a great job and done their jobs, but the fact remains that the earlier comments that there were towns that didn't know what to do or who to call, those comments are true because I talked to those towns. One of the things I'd like to see is, I mean, Homeland Security and Emergency Management is the authority. They know the stuff, they do a great job. Proactive communication, minimum of once a year, because we do get turnover and select boards. Should something happen, here's who you call, and these are your first steps. Emergency operations plan that includes temporary repair standards and advice. That ought to be easy. I live on a private road. It washed out in mud season. We got a contractor to come up, look at it, give us an estimate in one day, and the road was rebuilt the next day. So Cranebrook Road kind of frustrates me that it's still sitting there completely busted apart, because this year I literally know how fast it can be done. And so anyway, there's that. The emergency loan program, Councilor Kenny raised a good issue. It's kind of useless for this. It's good later for paying for stuff, but it's predicated on there being a presidential declaration. And I think his comment about there being some way for the state to kick it off is spot on. There are some things that need to be done today, not 60 days from now. Go back to my earlier gripe about how it happens. Temporary road openings. Representative Aaron brought up, well, why aren't there rapid response teams from DOT? I can answer that question because we haven't created those legislatively and authorized an allocation. And I think it's a fabulous idea, and we should probably do that. We're a town of 800 people and minimal resources that has the required, the recommended DRA fund balance. They don't have the money to build a road and they have to get it open tomorrow. So what do? So I don't know, I'd like to talk to some of you and maybe more about how we do leverage state resources to deploy rapid response teams. And maybe that would ease some of the angst about, no, you can't put that culvert there, or it's okay to do this now while it's temporary, understanding you might be throwing that money away later on. But and that loan program, the damage has to be 25% of your revenue, funds raised by local taxes. That doesn't seem to match up with what DRA says that you should have in the bank, and I'd like somebody to probably help me go over that and get those things to line up. You're on the hook for this much damage. Here's how much money you should be in the bank. I think those numbers should be closer together. So those are things I just wanted to throw out there that I'd like to work on with somebody. I don't know who somebody is, but you all know where to find me.
Thanks, Steve. And that 2005 legislation, Councilor Kenny, if you have a citation for that, that would be worth taking a look at too.
I have OLS Scott's trying to dig me up notes on that because it was ITL by finance 24-0. And unfortunately, the committee report in the House Journal is one sentence, which wasn't particularly helpful.
Okay, so it wasn't adopted.
It was not.
So we need more assessment in Cheshire County and Sullivan counties, Upper Valley. Is that anything that can be fast-tracked?
I had a feeling this question was going to come up. We have more funding for interns next summer to do more culvert assessments, and I pretty much anticipated that an outcome of this conversation was going to place those regions on the priority list. And I think we are prepared to do that because we've been wanting to complete the western part of the state anyway because it's a gap and it's within commuting distance of Concord for our interns every day. So that will certainly be on the radar.
Do you work with T-Square?
Yes.
That's another resource, I think. Again, T-Square works a lot with provides the education for the public works community.
Mm-hmm.
So through T-Square, you can get to this program and potentially even assist in finding interns for them.
Mm-hmm.
Chris, I don't know if yours is, you wrap up or no?
Mine's just a real quick.
Yeah.
So just from the county's perspective, one of the things that we can do, we can facilitate these conversations. We have a good working relation with the city of Keene. We have a good relationship with working with Southwest Regional Planning Commission, and of course a great relationship working with Senator Kahn. So we have the capability. Since COVID hit, we've probably had 6 Zooms with towns, and we've invited the delegation to be part of those discussions too. In those meetings, we bring in whoever the expert is. We plan the agenda. A lot of those, Peter Clark from Senator Sheen's office, who's on the call today, has been one of those speakers, but we've had New Hampshire Municipal Association, Margaret Burns, we've had others just listen in to the conversation, give insight into certain things that are going on. So that's something that we can do. We've been doing it, continue to do it. We've got, the commissioners and the delegation allowed me to hire Will Pearson, who's an attorney here in the city, who is also, he is our ARPA funds coordinator. And he's going through, and with the Department of Treasury, with the fogginess of the guidance, he's been able to work in greater detail. We also sent $1 million of we received $14.7 million here in Cheshire County from the ARPA funds. And we sent $1 million of that back to the towns. We did it through the apportionment of the taxes from the Department of Revenue Administration. So the city of Keene pays 25% of the, and so that's the portion they're getting back. Those monies may not be able to use directly for the water mitigation, but they can be worked for something else that frees up the money to move over here. So we wanted to do something. I can tell you that in the city of Keene, that's about a $250,000 increase that they weren't thinking of. I can also say in Ringe it's 87, in Swansea it's 80,000, and that's off the top of my head. I could probably keep on going. The other thing we did is we set aside $1 million of the ARPA monies for small businesses and for nonprofits, so that they could apply for grants between $1,000 and $20,000, utilizing the guidance, of course, of the Department of Treasury, so that they could, they could use that money. So if they had some damage to the plant, they can pay for something over here to now be able to take care of monies that they're going to put over here. So we're trying to do it, be as proactive as we possibly can. Maybe something that we sit down with Tim Murphy at Southwest Regional Planning Commission and say, how do we work with towns to really get their mitigation plans current? Is it something that maybe we can use some of the ARPA monies or something to allow, to have something so we can get those plans so they're all up to date. There may be other things that down the road that we can continue to have conversations about here, but I just wanted to say from the county's perspective, these are a few things. And again, we would not be able to do this if it wasn't for the work that Senator Shaheen, Senator Hassan, and Congresswoman Custer have done to get these monies down to us with the CARES Act and the ARPAs.
Thanks for that.
The plans are becoming current. I just recently completed one round of funding of 5 towns. I'm working on another round of funding of 9 towns, and then in the next round, there's 5 more towns. So they're getting done very quickly. HSEM has been great with, providing us with those funds.
Are we up to date?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, there's always, when we're completed with one round of funding,
Right.
then the next round of funding
Right.
comes, and they do it on a rotating, they give us a list on a rotating basis as far as what plans are becoming nearly expired. So that's already taken care of. I do agree that, I think that, maybe we can have a couple of webinars. I would say probably 2, one to talk about storm event funding, and, ways to access that, and the other would be what to do to reduce the impact of the next storm.
And we'll set up a time to talk,
Yeah.
and because in my world, it would be a biannual, every election cycle, let's
Mhm.
set up those meetings and
Yeah.
let's make sure everything's where it needs to be. And the other thing I should have said is, we've got commissioners on the call, we've got the delegation members on the call, and it's their progressive thinking, that they're looking forward to see how we can do things that we were able to put these monies where we thought, internally and then into the community.
So here's my worry. We're at 2:00. It's going to be very hard to get this range of folks back together again. Our requests of them are a little vague for going forward. I think Shane's got one. But this, I hear some of the frustration. I hear Representative Birch talking about Westmoreland. We know that prior to Fallon coming on, we know that Westmoreland has had recurring. We know where our recurring, and in this area, because of the water flows of small brooks and rivers, that they're going to go over to the Connecticut, and they just can't handle the additional storm capacity. So between what have inventoried from previous and what the Department of Transportation has known about your recurring maintenance and what DES knows about this region, can we assemble an inventory of recurring problem spots?
I think
I think the answer to the question is yes. The challenge is getting the towns to participate and getting them, to say, here are my problems. The state folks got the big ones. Everything I'm hearing and everything I dealt with in 05 through 15 in Keene are my small off ones. I dealt with Westmoreland all that time trying to help selectmen get through these processes. Then it goes to the bottom of the list. This most recent one, the towns and their staffs, whether it's the select board, road agent, or emergency management director, know what it is. It's getting into these processes, and it is talking about putting together a group like they've done over on the seacoast for a number of their issues. And putting together that plan that says, okay, here's what we need to do. The state's got certain culverts that they need to deal with. But when you go off the state highways on the local roads, it's us.
No, there's no question. If I go, I can go to Winchester and I can pinpoint the several recurring. I know where the surcharge is going to come right back up into the center of the town or into the center of the plaza. I know in Marlboro it's going to bubble up right through the center of town and erode the same houses that it did. And I know the Cold River is going to do what it's going to do every time we have a major event. And it's going to hit the several roads, John, that you have to do every time that happens. So, and then we got Sullivan County that has the same kind of recurrence.
Part of that is that, we don't seem to change the designs of these roads when we fix them. Or we put in culverts where they don't belong because the engineers tell us they have to be there. Whether they have to be there or not, I don't know. But, I think part of the problem is that, you keep doing the same thing over and over again instead of changing changing to adapt to what the problem is. I mean, Cranebrook Road washed out.
We have some good benchmarks. I lived in Elstead Center during the 2005 flood. I was
Right.
without power for over a week and was driving in circles trying to get everywhere. The work they did down on 123 that fixed the huge washout there was entirely untouched by these past events. It was engineered correctly, it was installed correctly, and it has maintained its integrity this whole period. And I think that's what we're missing here is we've heard it said over and over again. A temporary fix is just that, a temporary fix. What's needed is the will and the ability and the funding to make those temporary fixes permanent, done the right way.
And we have the opportunity now with that.
We,
You have your public assistance hazard mitigation, and then also your hazard mitigation grant program for things that weren't damaged, but we recognize the piece, and I hate to sound like a broken record, is that 25% match, because that's where people struggle, communities struggle with doing that. You can have the best plans or the best applications, but if you don't have the funding for that 25%, it's not going to get repaired.
and our ARPA money cannot be used for that 25%.
Right, as of now, no. I know during COVID, they allowed for CARES money, they made that change, but that was a presidential determination. But as we know right now, correct Arthur, the ARPA funds cannot be used for that match.
Right, that's correct.
Yep.
I do think that we're going to see things change as we move forward from these last rain events. It certainly has gotten the attention of people as to, we're really not prepared for this, and, oh, what are we gonna, we had 3 happen in a row, this could happen again next year, this could happen again this year. Every time we hear the storm is coming, it puts fear into some of these people. So I think we've got the attention, and I think we've got an opportunity to get those in the towns to listen and take the time to take the money to do the upgrades and the culverts that we've been preaching to them for so long.
Well, and we also have shown experience in the past. We have the Monadnock Broadband Group that came together, didn't really understand where they were going to go at the time when we knew what we needed to do, but we were able to come together and get a roadmap so that we're now looking at being one of the strongest communities when it comes to the last mile. But why can't we do something similar on that level? I don't know when I say that, I don't know what it means, but it seems to me it's some of the ABCs of just getting started when a crisis hits, of what you can and can't do, and who are the players that we need to start helping towns with too.
So, just one thing quick. I don't think it's always the town's fault that they're not doing the work.
No.
I mean, Cranebrook Road was repaired, it was not repaired, was rebuilt 3 years ago. And we had put in new culverts, we repaved it, everything was done with the DES engineers, and it still got damaged beyond repair. I mean, right now. It's absolutely unbelievable to us that we spent so much time and effort and money with engineers, with everything, and this road still got destroyed.
And typical problem spot? What's the difference between Alsted's situation, rebuild, and yours?
Well, Alstead was rebuilt from the storms in 2005 with a significant amount of hazard mitigation money. I can't speak to the Cranebrook Road, but, I mean, Alstead, you probably know better than anyone, it was, everything was increased.
It was increased, I mean, and at the end of the day, what you're all talking about are standards. And I will tell you, again, being 28 years in the public works community in the state of New Hampshire, we don't always build things looking ahead. I guarantee, probably if you look at the Kramer Road, it was probably built to a 25-year standard, which is what's acceptable. But unless you're willing to talk about climate resiliency, and spend the extra dollars to go up to a 50-year standard, I mean, that's really what we're talking about. The Alstead one, they went with a 100-year standard after Alstead. They didn't have to, but they went to that. So these are the decisions and the discussions that are going to need to be held at the local level, unfortunately. Because at the end of the day, it's the local level that's going to have the standards, who are going to enforce it when the developers come in. Because that's all part of the problem too. So,
Alsted used hazard mitigation
yes, they use hazard mitigation.
Right, so from
to help build that bridge. And
Yeah, so there's two buckets of hazard mitigation. Hazard mitigation as a direct result of something being damaged in a federally declared disaster. And then we get an additional 15% that can go statewide for anyone to apply for that's not, that they've identified through their hazard mitigation plans, this bridge, this culvert, this whatever has to be improved. But yeah, so anything that was damaged through these storms, we should look at the 406 mitigation, and then others, we can look at additional funding.
so,
By all means, I wasn't meaning that, it's all the town's fault. It's often the coordination of, you've got the EMD, you've got the road agent, you've got the board of selectmen. If they're not all in agreement at the same time of going with an upgrade, upsized culvert, then, and the fact that nobody could have predicted this recent event. Nobody was, would we have thought years ago to upsize things to the level that we needed to? I doubt it. So what we do need to realize is these events are not, this is not an isolation event. This is gonna happen again. So we need to pay attention, and we need to do the proper sizing of the culverts and the proper ditching to be able to handle these events.
so, Dave, you had a thought.
I just want to make sure that you know that we are willing, the DOT is willing to stay engaged in this discussion and to come back with this group or a similar group in a month, in 2 months, whatever is deemed reasonable. And I want to be very clear that these are not easy decisions. These are not decisions that don't have huge financial implications. And this is not a simple issue. So yes, that section of Alsted held up this storm. Had there been a beaver dam upstream that let go as a result of this storm, it may not have. These 25-year design culverts, if you design them for 50 years, they might not cost twice as much, but they might cost 1.5 times as much as at least. There are economic impacts all the way through, and it takes a group that's willing to be engaged and stay engaged to have those discussions. Westmoreland, there's sections of that area that never should have been built in, that were built in, and that will flood again. And we can look at the maps, we can look at the drainage areas, and we can have those candid, honest discussions that no matter what we try to do, we're not going to stop Mother Nature in some of those places, because the water's going to flow downhill, it's going to get to the Connecticut River eventually, and it's going to get to the ocean eventually. And everything we do as humans typically only helps it get there quicker and exacerbates all of these issues. There are strategies we can implement, but if we don't check them, the water just comes quicker, more, faster. So it's a bigger discussion, and we're willing to stay engaged with this section over the coming months to help get to some understandings and some answers.
So I'm trying to see if there's what are my takeaways from this, which I really thank you all for coming to Keene and having this conversation. It's very meaningful for us to have this kind of liaison relationship, and it feels like at a very high level. So this is helpful. I think besides beaver mitigation, if we could there needs to be a town communication. And I think this likely comes, I don't know, Southwest is a part of that communication, but from the two county administrators. And if we could get this hazard mitigation plan priorities of each town, that begins to assemble some information, some body of information that doesn't seem to be aggregated anywhere, right? Except for maybe in your agency. And I don't know if that's something that we should be asking for an inventory of what you have for hazard mitigation for these two counties.
Everything we have comes from the local
Right,
plan.
right. But I guess my point is, if we assembled something, I mean, there's nothing to look at. I mean, maybe there is.
Yes, there is.
Okay.
So the flood
Yes, there is.
The flood hazards geodatabase that I was talking about
Yeah.
earlier is the receptacle for, the GIS-based receptacle for all that information. So this is an example of what Allsted looks like. So every flood hazard mitigation, so every polygon that you see there either comes from a hazard mitigation plan locally identified flood issue, or it's an official damage report that was placed by the town at WebEOC, or that comes from the National Weather Service local storm reports. So the receptacle of what it is you're asking for already exists. I think the question is, what I would offer the question is how do we make that database better than it currently is? Which we've been working on that piece.
You called this what?
It's a flood hazards geodatabase.
And, yes, we all do. All right, so can that get turned into something that, see, there's a funding issue, and there's an opportunity to accelerate these hazards and the mitigation of these hazards. So ultimately, somebody's going to look at not just, you know, the aggregation of that map and it's statewide, but they're going to look at some list of, here's 1 mile of culvert in Ackworth that needs replacement. That's ridiculous because nobody would put a mile of culvert. But I mean, but all right. So there's Ackworths, there's Alsteds, there's Walpoles. There's how do we assemble that for 2 counties in western New Hampshire?
Okay. I think it's a staffing issue. I think it's more than funding, or different than funding. I think it's a staffing, it's a capacity issue. And I think there's an important component of this conversation that's obviously not in this room, and that's the municipalities. That's where the buffer's going to meet the road.
But that's what I'm hoping. I hear you. I'm sorry if I cut you off. But that, if we had that inventory, then it could go back to a public viewing, at least at the town select board level, to say, here's what we know. These and they probably need some prioritization categories, and they probably exist some, you know, in your funding scheme. What's not there?
We can't even give the towns free money at this point. I mean, we're a couple days away from the Gopher portal closing for these municipalities to get free money, and there's a list of 50 strong that aren't doing it essentially in New Hampshire.
Right.
So if we can't even give them free money, how are we going to ask them to get this inventory?
Well,
I mean, again, I think you hit it on, and I know Chris is here, I know Derek left. It's back to, in New Hampshire, again, we don't have a single entity that does, other than the county is sort of there, and our planning commissions, who coordinate or at least have the ears of all the municipalities. What you're talking about in other states would be a county function.
Right.
All right? The county would be responsible for developing this plan and funding it, etc. We don't have that in New Hampshire. So the best things that we could do is put out there in Cheshire and Sullivan County, basically put out there, hey towns, who wants to come together? Because we have the resources, we have a basic plan that shows, at least from what's been gathered. Let's get together. If you want to participate, let's get together and start going through this. If you don't want to participate, hey, that's fine. Westmore, whoever, you're on your own, have a good day.
Right.
But that's about the only way I think you're gonna see to be able to develop at least a countywide or a larger regional, just like again, they've done over on the seacoast for particularly their water quality issues. They have created a number of quasi-governmental organizations that the various communities participate in and fund, et cetera. So that's, I mean, I think it's possible after this event. I mean, again, I've been through since, I was here in '05, I'm here in '21. We talked about this in '05. I'm here in '21 talking about it again. So I guess it's getting the attention of the municipalities, of the select boards, and getting them to agree.
Yeah, I think the difference is we've got the money.
Well,
I
we
mean,
have money
the
to
federal
come.
government does, Congress, thank you, Tom. You got your request?
I think from the Congressman's perspective, it sounds like we may be able to be helpful in terms, you mentioned there's an executive order to allow CARES Act funding to be used as.
It actually was from the president's
Presidential.
presidential order, or that
Yeah.
the CARES funding was allowed to be used for match for public assistance for COVID.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I think it may be a possibility going forward that we could perhaps write the administration on this matter to be able to
Can't say
allow
no if we
ARPA
don't
money
ask,
to be
right?
used for matching
Yeah,
funding.
and if we can coordinate that through 4 congressional offices, that'd be great.
We sure can.
Good.
Absolutely.
Thank you,
Alright,
Tom.
well, I think that would be,
Thanks for
an
being
area
here.
where we can be helpful going forward, as well as, again, facilitating conversations
Yep.
in that manner. So,
Thank you.
thanks for hosting this. Appreciate
Yes,
it.
no, thank you, Tom.
Thanks, guys.
And Shane, is there some way to translate the maps to something towns could review?
So I'm going to have a conversation with our friends at HSEM about that, and also the Silver Jackets, but we'll take a look at it.
Okay. And then we can have this conversation, Lisa, Court, Chris, Derek, about who we need to put at a table for you to review it and use your priority to weigh these and see if there's a request that can come from Western New Hampshire. Is that a reasonable goal?
I think
Is that what we
so.
should be aiming for?
I think too, we have everyone's ear, so giving an educational piece about what the hazard mitigation various programs are. They've been around for decades, but many people aren't aware of them unless they're working in them. And then partnering that with the work that Shane and his team have been doing. So I think it's really, we can use this opportunity to call attention to the programs that are out there. And we have a significant amount of money coming in from COVID for hazard mitigation that they just allowed. There's opportunities there and things coming. I think it's just awareness of the programs. It's the biggest piece.
And is that something you can take away?
Yeah, that's our office.
Is
We
it
manage
is
the
it within
programs,
the 1 month capability,
so it's
assuming
been
you don't get
something-
another crisis
Yeah,
on your
it's been
hands?
something we've been trying to do for years, so we have stuff that's already created. We just need to dust it off and, we can make it happen very quickly.
I think you've heard the request a couple of times.
Yeah, for sure.
For us at Southwest, we could, there is more that, we could participate in, but, we are not-for-profit, and funding is an issue. Like taking the time to come here today, was one thing, but if I were to go around to each town, the hazard mitigation money I can only use for hazard mitigation plans. I don't have the luxury to use it for any kind of training or anything, so.
Senator Kahn, if I may, just to
Yeah.
kind of build off of that, and since I have the opportunity to speak to it, emergency management in the state of New Hampshire is something that's not widely funded. We only have one community in the entire state that has a full-time emergency management director that is paid to do that work, and that's the city of Nashua. Manchester has waived their deputy, but everyone else, it's other duties as assigned or voluntold to do that. Many communities have a very small budget or no budget at all to do emergency management work. And so that's an area that, it's not an issue till it's an issue type of thing, but what our office tries to do in addition to the communities and counties and other programs, unfortunately comes back down to the lack of funding, because many people don't even know we exist until 5 or 6 phone calls in and, that kind of thing. So The folks coming to the EOC, DES, and DOT, they do it on their own time out of their regular budget. No one else at the state level is funded to work out of the EOC during emergency response. So trying to do that preparedness activities and competing with their other budgets is very tricky. So just for awareness and kind of building off what the planning commission was saying.
You don't see any funding immediately.
Right now, it's very limited, and every bucket we have has very strict rules. Our office is all federally funded or by private funding with a very minimal
General funds.
general funds, and that just happened the last couple of years. But none of those funds go to the other state agencies for response or anything like that.
So maybe this is something, Lisa, you can bring back to Tim and with the association of the planning commissions, put together what it is, what that would look like. Because if there's ARPA money and if we are serious about hazard mitigation, maybe some management dollar amount there to accelerate something, and yeah, you guys can put that together. Because it's the small towns, it's the, you know, that aren't going to do what Nashua and Manchester can do.
But I just caution about the ARPA, that expires in 4 years. So if we're bringing on people in 4 years, staff specifically, we're gonna have to lay them off in 2024 because these small towns don't have the money to support it.
Right. But it's to get us to make good use of the money over the 4 years, I guess is.
Well, we gotta hire them with something.
Yeah. So.
And if that's something we hired them with is money that expires in 4 years, then they're gone.
Yeah. Unless, anyway, we'll take an opportunity as it presents itself. All right. Anything more that people have that are summary kinds of thoughts? No? Thank you again. Okay, we've concluded. Would everybody who is here from out of town, and John too, leave a card so that those who are asking for the inventory of where to call, they'll know how to get to Shane?